So for my ArcGIS final project, I decided to ask the question, who would be affected by a nuclear meltdown in the US? So why I chose this question. I've always been interested in Chernobyl and have read endlessly about all the crazy things that have gone on over there since the reactor meltdown. So that got me thinking, what would happen if something similar happened in the US and who would be affected? The US is a lot more compact than Ukraine, so if a meltdown were to occur, it would be far more disastrous than the Chernobyl meltdown. The general consensus is that if a meltdown were to happen, anything within a 100-mile radius would not be safe. The US also has a vast river system to where a lot of it is connected in some ways, so I decided to include that as well. So to get started with doing this in ArcGIS, my first step in answering this question was to find a list of all the power plants in the US. I found a list on NRC.gov and started to input the coordinates with the Add XY points under the Add Data feature. There are currently 94 operating reactors and 56 power plants in the US, so inputting the data took a while. I couldn't find any tables for download, so I had to make my own Excel document with the data from the table. With the data inserted into Arc, this is what my map looked like with all the reactors mapped. So as you can see, most of the reactors are in the east, with the west only having a handful. In Georgia, we have 2 reactors, so in case of a meltdown, we would be one of the least affected states in the east. After that, I had to find a list of major cities in the US. All those cities are labeled in Arc. I needed the cities as a shapefile, so I could sort them by population to find what major cities would be affected. Also, so I could intersect the reactors with the major cities. I found a shapefile on the ArcGIS hub that had a robust amount of data on each city. It included a group layer that sorted the cities out into 4 categories of population. So for my major cities list, I found it on ArcGIS hub and included the top half of the most populated cities to avoid cluttering. As you can see, the states in the blue from the attribute table are located near power plants. These states include Dallas, San Antonio, Houston, Chicago, Philadelphia, and New York. So to get started, first things first, I had to make a buffer zone of an 100-mile radius for each nuclear reactor. The point of this is to find what cities lay in the 100-mile radius. This is what the buffer zone ended up looking like. So the gray circle around each power plant or reactor is the 100-mile radius, and it covers a good chunk of the eastern United States. For Georgia, a good chunk of the state is also covered, so if one were to go off, about 75% of the state would be in danger. So once the zone was placed, I had to find a way to mark all the cities that lied within the 100-mile radius. I found that you can intersect features in Arc, so I intersected the cities with the danger zone from the nuclear reactor, and had all the major cities marked on the map that are at risk. After I found what cities would be affected, I mentioned earlier that I also wanted to find what rivers would be affected by this. So I found a shapefile of the major rivers in US and used the same process as I did for the cities. Here's what it looked like. So the rivers on the map are marked with blue to show just how far it goes out. Looking at the attribute table, 770 rivers could be affected by a nuclear meltdown. With the cities and rivers intersected with the danger zone, I finally had my end result. Looking at the legend, the cities are marked with a red exclamation to show what cities are at risk. The danger zone is a transparent yellow to highlight what parts of the US could also be at risk. So with my end results, I can conclude that in the event of a nuclear meltdown, and just to list a few cities, Minneapolis, Chicago, Detroit, Toronto, Dallas, New York City, Denver, and Los Angeles are all at risk in case of nuclear disaster. Looking back at the recent meltdown in Fukushima that was triggered by a tsunami, with climate change in the future landscape comes more extreme weather and earthquakes, so a meltdown is very much so possible. With a nuclear meltdown, it is easy to say millions upon millions of lives are at risk in the event one happens to ignite. And even if one does not happen where we live, looking at the affected rivers, we would face water scarcity and without a doubt food scarcity. So the key takeaway from my results is to not build reactors so close to highly populated areas. They should consider a list of factors before building, such as nearby water sources, population, and projected population growth in the area. It's easy to see how many areas of high population would be affected by a reactor meltdown. The problem with a reactor meltdown is that they are spontaneous. Unlike a natural disaster where people can prepare beforehand, a meltdown strikes out of nowhere and can wreak havoc for centuries to come. So that about concludes the analysis, method, and results part of the video. The main analysis technique I used was buffering. Buffering is a spatial analysis tool and one of the most important tools in the program, as it allows you to analyze and identify features within a certain proximity. It also allows you to identify relationships between two polygon features. I used it to define the radius of the nuclear reactor zones and define the cities and rivers that lied within it. So the layers in the end did turn out pretty messy, but looking past that, the layers I use with sources was US major cities from ArcGIS Hub, power plant buffer intersect, and I used the buffering and intersect tool. Cities within danger zone, which was used with the intersect tool. I got the power plants table from nrc.gov, and with that I used XY point table and data collection. My next layer was affected rivers, and I got that from the ArcGIS hub as well. And my danger zone layer was made with the buffering, intersect, and spatial join tool. Well, that concludes the video. I hope you're able to see this because I spent so much time on this, especially with the animations and everything. Those take so long.